The expectation around the cabinet table is that NPHET are going to change their recommendation on masks tomorrow after their meeting, and that the mask mandate will be replaced with a guidance urging people to continue wearing them in certain situations. That would be in public transport, in shops, in restaurants and in schools as well. The effect will not be the disappearance of masks, but certainly the effect would be far fewer masks out there in society. Mary McCarthy is a columnist with the Irish Independent, and she joins me now. Mary, would you be encouraged by this advice?
Kieran, how's it going? I would be delighted to see the back of masks in schools in particular. Everywhere, actually. I think that, getting rid of masks will be that will be a big step in us just moving on from COVID and getting our mojo back. But in particular for the children, I really just feel, it perpetuates a sense of anxiety and the sense that we're still in an emergency in the schools, and it's nonsensical. So I'd be thrilled if they recommend to scrap them. I really would.
Yeah, I know you'd been writing about this before. You were quite upset when they were introduced.
Do you know, I was, and I'm obviously not a child development expert, but I just felt a real kind of visceral thing that this can't be good for the kids. I mean, the secondary school kids, they've been wearing them, Kieran, since September 2020. So my eldest is 13, so he was wearing them this year. And, he always, I'd be asking him, do you mind wearing them, or, how do you feel? And he'd say, I don't care. But then he'd come out with things like, do you know what, I don't really recognise that boy. I don't know if he's in my school. Or he'd say, I can't really hear the teacher. So I think on a subconscious level, it was really detrimental for the secondary kids. But the primary, when they brought them in December, I just felt, why are you doing this? When we had no vaccines, there was no masks. And now you're bringing them in. And then when it emerged, Omicron was milder. I mean, they still kept them. I just felt, look, in the UK, they brought them in for, I think it was 2 weeks for secondary. They never brought them in at primary. And that seemed to me to make sense. When there's when there's uncertainty, okay, bring them in, maybe slow the spread. But sure, look, it didn't slow the spread of Omicron. It galloped throughout, masks or no masks. So, and anyway, Kieran, another element is the hassle factor. I just felt, my son was constantly in trouble. He'd be forgetting them. I'd get notes home in his homework notebook. He forgot his mask. As a parent, I was always forgetting them, going to pick them up. I just feel, bring it on, take off the mask, let the kids be kids again,
And Mary, what about some of the other parents maybe listening to this who'd be nervous about masks being abandoned? Maybe they haven't had. We've had COVID in our house. We've all fallen victim to it, and it wasn't that bad for any of us. But there's other people who haven't had it. They're still nervous about it. They don't want it in the house, and they'd like to see masks continue in schools. What do you say to them?
Yeah, do you know? Yeah, I do understand what some parents feel that way, but I also think, look, it's actually, there's no sense to them, because the kids aren't wearing, I'm at karate now at the moment. My kids are doing karate. No masks on. When they go in tomorrow, they've got masks on. It makes no sense. I think it well, Kieran, with parents, I think it's perpetuating their sense of anxiety that COVID is obviously it's nothing. COVID is serious, obviously, but it's not hugely serious. I've got a kid at home this week. My 13-year-old has COVID, and yes, he is. He's not himself, but if they get it, it's not the end of the world. The thing is, it's not going anywhere. So I think we just have to get to a situation where we can just move on and try and have a normal situation. And the masks in schools, I really feel, even the parents that feel, oh no, my kid's fine wearing a mask. Really, are they? Is it really normal for, kids not to see their teacher's face? It's harder to teach. I have friends who are teachers who tell me these flipping masks are driving them up the wall. They can't see the kids' faces. There's more messing, just forgetting the mask, just the kind of practical issue of them, the kids forgetting it, always having to give out to them, So, well, yeah, I know. I do know some parents will be reluctant, but I kind of feel, look, really, it's the best thing to do. It's the best for everything, for parents as well.
David has already texted in and say, I won't take an opinion from a journalist about masks. I will listen to doctors. David, the reason we're talking about it is because the doctors in charge are going to lift this mandate. That is the expectation. Maybe you missed that earlier, but the recommendation, likely from NPHET tomorrow, is the lifting of the mandate on masks. This is not a Newstalk decision. I should add. And Michael Gillespie is the General Secretary of the TUI, the Teachers Union of Ireland. Michael, do you have a sense of how your members feel about this if it does come to pass that NPHET change the recommendation?
Well, yes. I mean, obviously, whatever the public health advice is, we will follow the public health advice, as will the students in the schools. I suppose the advantage of the mitigation factors that have been applied in schools has been that it's kept, schools across the country have been very good at keeping the level of COVID in schools lower than what's in the community. It hasn't kept it out of the schools, as Mary had said, but it has kept it lower. And it's obviously the adherence to these things that have kept it lower. And masks were one aspect of that. And what we would be afraid of, I suppose, is that we don't, because we're now currently in exam mode, it's not just the terminal exam in June. We have orals, practicals, project days, practical days, they're all occurring. We would be urging the people are cautious about them because we don't want people missing days because of that. Leaving certs have an advantage in that they've got, built into the contingency. They have all got second sittings for everything. The junior cycle students don't. They'll only have a one-off chance of doing these things. So we're just saying that people need to be cautious. We want to keep the levels low in schools, as low as we possibly can, and mitigation does help this and keeps people doing what we think is that we've now realised over the last 2 years is the most important thing, that face-to-face teaching and learning is by far the most important and the best for students.
Would you have many members, Michael, who are nervous about the change in recommendation or the lifting of the mandate, and not because students might miss out on important class time in an exam year, but rather that they just fear for their own safety, that they're still nervous? And then, look, there's lots of people, and they're perfectly entitled to be nervous about COVID, and I'm sure teachers are in that group.
Oh yeah, the same as the wider society. I think we have people who are afraid to be exposed because they may have someone at high risk at home, or they're at high risk themselves because of some underlying condition. So absolutely, those are going to be there. We're not going to remove that. And the numbers are fairly high still, and the fact that we'll say the 4 to 39-year-olds, they're self-reporting, after an antigen test, the numbers may be higher than we think as well. So it hasn't gone away. It's still there. And obviously, whereas the vast majority of us who've got it, we've been lucky enough to get it very mild. There are people who don't get a mild dose of it and get it. So yes, the nervousness is absolutely there. And people worry about that they would be the unlucky one that won't get it, a mild dose of it, or, as you said there, bring it home to someone who's vulnerable. That's a real fear for a lot of people. Yeah,
and I suppose, look, we should reiterate that the expectation, and this isn't set in stone yet, it might not come to pass, but the expectation is tomorrow, if the mandate is lifted, that there'll still be guidance urging people to wear masks and encouraging it. And if any teacher out there happens to be nervous if the mandate is lifted, there's nothing to stop them wearing a mask into the classroom if they do happen to fall into that category, that they are nervous about bringing COVID home for whatever reason. Another big area of change would be public transport, of course, not just for public transport users, but for public transport workers. General Secretary of the NBRU, the National Bus and Rail Union, Dermot O'Leary, is with me as well. Dermot, what do your members make of this likely recommendation?
Well, I suppose unusually in this one, I suppose it took the government to listen to the NBRU back in May 2020 when we launched a campaign, having looked at countries in the Far East and Asia, what they did with face coverings.
Do they not often listen to you, Dermot?
Sorry?
Do they not often listen to you?
Well, look, that's an issue, so I can assure you, and that's what I was supposed to cover that myself, actually, to be honest with you. But certainly it took from May to July of 2020 for the government to listen to our call for mandatory face coverings. There is concern, of course, among frontline transport workers, to answer your question, particularly in the likes of Bus Air and Irish Rail, where frontline members will be exposed, very close up with customer interaction. So that's a concern. What really would concern us is the recommendation as opposed to the mandated. And I can see a situation where people are going to be, it's going to be people having rows with each other about, coughing and spluttering or whatever people do, obviously, on public transport and generally speaking. So I can see rows breaking out. What also concerns me is that Professor Christine Lauscher was out this morning talking about the seasonality of this and basically suggesting that if there's going to be a move to reduce face coverings, and maybe it should be done later in the year, maybe mid-March or probably into April. And I think it's probably a bit of surprise that they're talking about this on a day where we're visited by storms and such. And the likes of that.
It's just interesting that point you make about getting into rows where where someone is coughing and spluttering. Obviously, at the moment, if everybody is in a mask or wearing a mask, those rows don't arise. Your fear is what? Is that you'll have some people with masks on, you'll have lots of people without them. One person without them is coughing and spluttering, and I suppose because it's not a firm rule, that's where the kind of friction erupts.
And the frontline transport worker could find themselves in a situation where they're expected to act as the peacemaker. And look, a separate issue, we have lots of cases of antisocial behaviour in public transport. We don't want to be increasing it, but certainly in terms of frontline transport workers. And again, I mentioned the point about people listening to us. The National Transport Authority in 2.5 years of a pandemic have never once spoken to any of the trade unions that represent frontline transport workers, and that's a sad indictment of those people. So I didn't expect any consultation on this one, unlike, I suppose, your teacher, Michael Gillespie and his colleagues, and restaurants and hotels were all consulted with directly. We weren't. We had to fend for ourselves and do our campaigning on the airwaves, thanks to shows like yourselves. But yeah, look, there is concerns there, Kieran, certainly in relation to this, if it becomes a feature sooner rather than later. But certainly we would look at a situation. Okay. By the way, when you started the programme, not unlike your text, I was a bit confused. I thought I was on a different section of the show, because I thought the masks we were spoken about as some type of fashion item. They're there for a reason, and they're there to protect people from contracting this variant, which, by the way, I think Michael touched on it, the numbers are still on the rise, or the numbers are still high, and Professor Loshers did say that the variant was still out there, the Omicron variant was still there. Of course, look, we are mostly fully mandated, and I suppose the exposure to ICU and hospital cases is down, but certainly the concern would remain there for frontline transport workers.
You mentioned some of the other sectors there, Dermot. Adrian Cummins is the CEO of the Restaurant Association. Adrian, would your members welcome this change? The change, I suppose, it would apply mostly to staff at this stage. Most people are not wearing masks. I don't know if they wear them walking around the restaurant, but that's not that often.
Good evening, Kieran. Well, obviously, like all your previous speakers, we will follow the public health advice, and we have done so right through the pandemic. And if NPHET decides to lift the mandatory wearing of face masks for staff in working within workplaces of hospitality, we'll follow that. And if they say no, we'll abide by the.
Well, let me ask you: would you be disappointed if they said no and said let's stick with them?
I would be, because staff have come to us right across our membership across the state and said, with customers not wearing face masks and don't have to inside in a hospitality premises, but we do, and we feel that it should be a personal choice for employees. If they want to wear a mask, it's up to them. If that is the guidance that possibly could come out from NPHET, and we have some situations now where certain hospitality staff just won't wear masks at the moment because they feel that the pandemic is fully over, their belief, but it's not. We'll always follow public health advice at the end of the day, and we look forward to NPHET's recommendation tomorrow. Yeah,
well, that recommendation due after the NPHET meeting tomorrow. It is not set in stone, as I say. The expectation, though, certainly the strong expectation around government circles, is that the advice from NPHET will change. It will no longer be a mask mandate, but they will encourage people to wear masks in certain situations, and there'll be plenty of people out there who maybe will not welcome a change. There is nothing to stop them wearing masks into the future. Lots of people getting in touch on 53106. Are they going to scrap the pods in school as well? It is impossible to teach art and science, etc., when children can't move about freely. Another listener says, I'm sick of masks as a parent and a teacher. Kids don't like the masks and they don't work. Fear has been perpetuated by these masks. Freedom of choice is necessary now. And one more, I can't wait to take the mask off. And I think we need a scientific review of any evidence to support the use of masks other than KN95 or N95 masks. With the tiny particles in this virus, do you really think a gappy mask stops it? Where is the science? And that is from a pharmacist who has worn a mask to comply with the law only. Well, thank you for that text.